The story told in this video is about a horrifying event that took place in a small, charming town back in the distant year of 1988, involving a young mother. The police had 2 suspects, but a total of about 5,000 people were considered. On that same day, in the same place, another tragic incident happened with another young mother. It took 35 years to find the killer, and this led to yet another death. Subscribe to this channel and don't forget to click the bell to get notifications about new videos. Three Rivers, St. Joseph County, Michigan, 1988. On December 2nd at 3:30 p.m., 18-year-old Mike Warner finished his work at the local market and was walking home to his girlfriend. However, as he approached the house, he noticed that the door was not closed and immediately suspected something was wrong. Upon entering, the young man was confronted with a horrifying scene. There were numerous traces of blood in the room, both on the floor and on the walls. At the same time, the sound of a child crying could be heard. Mike rushed upstairs to the room where his girlfriend's 9-month-old daughter was. She was fine, in her crib, safe, and even in a clean diaper. Then, with the baby in his arms, the young man went to look for her mother. 19-year-old Cathy Sue Swartz was in another room and had been brutally murdered. Law enforcement officers who arrived at the crime scene found the girl's body and her blood throughout the house, but the attacker's blood was also present. In addition, writings made in blood were found in the house and on the victim's leg. Although the full text and all locations were not disclosed, it is known that one of them was, "I was here." A clear bloody fingerprint of a stranger and a similar footprint of his bare foot were also found. Detectives surmised that the killer had washed the blood off himself right there, in the victim's apartment. Coroners discovered multiple stab wounds, including on the victim's throat. There were also signs of strangulation, and the criminal had done this with his hands. However, death was due to a major loss of blood. The presence of so-called defensive wounds testified to the deceased's fierce resistance. The motive for the attack was clearly rape. Attempting to establish the circumstances of what happened, the police interviewed Cathy's neighbors in the residential complex. Some of them claimed that they had seen unfamiliar people near the girl's house that day. These were a man and a woman. Composite sketches were made, but neither of them was ever found. 2 days after the murder, on December 4th, the police arrested a suspect, 18-year-old Troy Schultes, Cathy's ex-boyfriend. Troy denied his involvement in the murder. He claimed that he was working that day and then went dancing with his new girlfriend. His alibi was confirmed by several witnesses, and he successfully passed a polygraph test, but he was kept in jail nonetheless. On December 8th, a comparison was made between the bloody traces found at the crime scene and the blood sample that Troy voluntarily provided. The test showed that Troy's biological fluid did not match the one found at the crime scene. However, the young man was released only a week later, completely clearing him of all suspicions. Ultimately, Schultes filed a lawsuit for wrongful imprisonment, as he was kept in jail even after the test results were in. Suspicion in this case also fell on Mike Warner, the man who had discovered his beloved, despite there being no issues in his relationship with the deceased. The young man reported that they had decorated a Christmas tree the evening before, and the next day at 5 a.m., Cathy saw him off to work, saying that she would do the laundry. Nevertheless, fingerprints were taken from Mike and his entire family, including the women. The same actions were taken regarding all members of Cathy's own family. However, no match was found. It turned out that Cathy and Mike had recently gotten engaged and were planning to get married in a month, with the young man having already bought rings. But the investigators put pressure on him, followed him daily, and constantly interrogated him, trying to figure out who else had been in the deceased's house recently. It would only be several decades later that it would be revealed that one of the people named by Mike was the one detectives were looking for. The Three Rivers police even sought help from more experienced colleagues from the state police. They assisted both in gathering evidence at the crime scene and in the subsequent investigation. Due to the discovery of the alleged killer's fingerprint, investigators tried for a long time to find the culprit thanks to this evidence. And when DNA analysis comparison technology became widespread, they used that as well. In total, as claimed, about 5,000 people were checked for involvement in this crime, but this led to no results. At the same time, they tried to identify the person responsible for Cathy's death using other methods. The FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime created a profile of the presumed offender, suggesting that the killer might have lived in the area and possibly knew the victim. Cathy herself was described as a quiet, kind, and gentle girl who mostly spent time at home caring for her daughter. She enjoyed tomboy things like hunting, fishing, and camping, but was also a gifted artist. She didn't have any history of drinking or drug use, and according to everyone who knew her, she had no known enemies. However, on the same day and around the same time as Cathy's murder, around noon, a car driven by her neighbor veered off the road and ended up in the St. Joseph River. Inside the car was 24-year-old Christina Shelton and her 4-year-old daughter Sarah. As a witness claimed, for no apparent reason, the car veered off the road and drove into the water. It took rescuers over 30 minutes to extract the vehicle from the swift currents and icy waters. Christina never regained consciousness and died a few hours later in a local hospital. However, her daughter Sarah miraculously survived. The cause of this tragedy remains unknown to this day. Cathy's boyfriend, Mike Warner, took the loss hard. As his mother recounted, he often brought roses to his bride's grave, the flowers she loved. He never married, struggled with alcoholism, could not hold down a job for long, and at the age of 53, still lives with his mother. Cathy's parents, Audrey and David, were granted custody of their granddaughter Courtney after their daughter's murder. Now, she's a mother herself. Over the years, the family continued to search for the person who killed their daughter and deprived their granddaughter of her mother. In 2012, Audrey passed away without ever knowing the name of the killer, while David died in 2022, also without finding the answers to his questions. Because we had exhausted every other lead we had in the case, and we, like everyone else, had seen on the news that FGG was being used to solve these old cold cases where everything else hasn't worked. So, I truly believe without FGG, we would have never solved this case. Detective Sam Smallcombe from the Three Rivers Police Department explained why they decided to turn to Othram Lab. The famous genealogical laboratory Othram took the biological material of the killer for modern DNA analysis in 2022. Western Michigan University, which works with the state police on old unsolved cases, began to study the information received. Soon, they identified one family with 4 sons. The DNA analysis of one of them was already in the U.S. criminal database, and it didn't match. 2 more voluntarily submitted tests, and also didn't match. The 4th brother was 53-year-old Robert Odell Waters. He was a friend of Cathy's fiancé, Mike Warner, with whom they had been friends since childhood. They used to build castles together, and Waters had stayed over at Mike's family's house multiple times. Moreover, they even were classmates. About a month before Cathy's murder, Cathy and Mike invited Waters to their house and spent several hours with him. It turned out that the police had known this name before. Mike mentioned Waters among those who had visited their house shortly before the tragedy. He had no criminal past, and soon he moved to Beaufort County in South Carolina, which is a 15-hour drive from the scene of the incident, and the investigation had no questions for him. This is now explained by the fact that his name was mentioned only on 1 page out of 10,000 in this case. As far as it is known, Waters was not noticed breaking the law either before or after Cathy's murder. He was loved by his family, considered a respected member of the local community, was quite successful in life, living in a $500,000 house and owning a plumbing company which he managed together with his wife. But his arrest put an end to his happy life. Less than a week later, on the morning of May 6, 2023, Waters was found dead in his cell on the morning of May 6th at the Beaufort County Detention Center in South Carolina, where he was awaiting extradition to Michigan. Sergeant Todd Peterson from the State Police Department stated that although the official cause of the man's death has not yet been announced, there is confidence that Waters took his own life. However, it was noted that there was no video surveillance in his cell. What do you think? Was it accidental that Cathy's neighbor's car went into the river? And could she have been the very woman neighbors saw near the deceased's house with a man?